Shoots and Ladders Greatest Comeback episode. You can actually find us on Spotify and YouTube. My name is Jason.
I'm Desiree Josen.
This episode is going to focus on greatest comebacks of wrestlers, whether it's due to addiction or retirement or injury or just maybe creative stalls. So this is actually going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have wrestlers from whether it's WCW, ECW, and WWE, and we're going to run through some of these wrestlers. So the first one we're going to go over is one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time, The Rock. One of my personal favorites, obviously a South Florida guy. This one's definitely interesting just because he actually, obviously he got into Hollywood, so he's kind of jumping in back and forth, but he's still involved. But anytime he comes back to the screen, he's obviously electrified. All right, what are your initial thoughts on The Rock?
Well, I know that he initially, I want to say, when was it? Back in like 2003, 2004, that's when he initially left. And that was also due to the WWE not renewing his contract.
Yeah.
But we also know a lot of it was because of his acting career and where that's taken him. So, but like you said, he is an icon, and anytime he returns, he's going to just get back to where he was just because of who he is and who his character is.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about this is he was the main event of WrestleMania 15. 25 years later, he's the main event of WrestleMania 40. Part of the reason why a lot of guys, when they retire and they stay out, is because they can't physically do the same things, is because they're out of shape. That's not even close to the case. And again, I mentioned this before. He actually he used to work out at a gym that I used to work out in Weston, and he's obviously in tip-top shape. He obviously, a lot of his roles in the movies wise, he plays some of those athletic type characters. So, and anytime he comes back on screen, it's just amazing. I remember when there were rumors when he came back originally the first time of, what his role was for that WrestleMania 27, and the crowd just exploded. And him and John Cena's promos against each other for that year were some of, if not the best promos. Anytime The Rock comes on camera, they have to scrap other segments within the show because he goes long and they love it. So anytime he comes back on, it's just great entertainment, and I am all for it, and I think most of the fans are too.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I'm like, I feel like this episode is going to be like, what are the best pops? Because it's always when they return. And I was just about to bring up with Cena when he returned on Raw with basically that's when The Rock came back, and that pop was huge. And then now look at him back in, another 10 years later in 2023, 2024, and he's the final boss and wanting to headline Mania, and he just took over again. He's timeless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that no matter where he is, he's always going to be involved. He's obviously on the board of TKO, and it's an evergreen type story, especially now because there's so much family in the actual industry. So yeah, as far as like greatest comebacks, I mean, this is going to be continuous. His comeback's going to be continuous, and I think that just is good for overall television.
He's not going anywhere anytime soon.
That very valid point. All right, the next one, and I know you were about to go off. One of the most just athletic, charismatic guys of all times. They call him flamboyant, but aka Mr. WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels. Take it away.
Why would you say I would go crazy over that? No, he's always going to be on this list as one of the greatest comebacks, just because his was a little different. We all know he did hurt his back in the 98 Rumble, the casket match with Undertaker. Everyone knows that fall that he took off the ring. So that's what initiated his time off. And then obviously that led into addiction.
No.
and not a not so great reputation backstage. So he was more of a liability towards, the mid to late 90s. So that's when he took his break, and we really didn't think he'd come back because Triple H formed a new version of DX, and it was the Attitude Era. And then, he cleans up and he is a saved man, and comes back in 2002 fresh and new and better than ever. And he has that remarkable match that he has with Triple H to prove that he still has it. And he went a good, another 10 years, and, headline WrestleMania multiple times.
Yeah. Amen on him getting saved, which is obviously just a great connection for us and just for all the Christians out there. So, which is awesome. And it definitely changed his life. What's also interesting about that, when he came back, I remember he beat Triple H for the title. And then Triple H beat him at Armageddon. That was actually at what's now known as Amaranth Arena in Sunrise. I was actually at that event. And what's funny about his comeback, I actually thought it was temporary. I thought he was just going to be there for, maybe 6 months. Like he had that little run with Triple H, and I thought he was just going to go back to retirement, maybe take a behind the scenes role, maybe be an announcer. But yeah, no, the fact that he lasted, kind of like you said, another 10 years is really, really impressive. And the way he went out against Undertaker was just epic. So yeah, that was, I would have to say, it was a great story.
And now look at him, and he's handling NXT and recruitment, and he's not going anywhere either. So
for sure. All right. Next guy is someone that is by far the hottest star in WWE. Someone that was revived when he hit during his first run. It was basically more of a joke, but Cody Rhodes, I love this one. I love this story because, and I've always said this, any wrestler that is basically marginalized, even though they have a lot of talent, anytime they get that push, and not only did Cody Rhodes get a push, he catapulted to the top, and he's up there now. And it's funny because when he left the first time to go to AEW, they rose him to the top, right? There. Mm-hmm. And when he left AEW to come back, WWE was, look, we're not going to mess this up this time. And they pushed him straight to the top, and wow, has it worked wonders. I absolutely love this. What do you got to say?
Yeah, they strapped a rocket ship to him.
But that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Well, towards, when he first started, he was always known as Dusty Rhodes' baby boy. And, he was a part of Legacy with Randy and Ted DiBiase Jr. So that just proves to you, just because you have a very well-known family, a very famous father in the business, that doesn't guarantee you success, because it clearly, creatively, during his years in the beginning, it didn't really work. Because what was it? He did like Stardust.
I was just about to say, and that was embarrassing. And that's the thing. And again, I don't think it was him. I just think it was creative. I think creative was just yuck.
and that's the thing is, and that shows what kind of person he is, because he really could have took a step down to be like, I don't think this is for me. I gave it a try. And then with him moving to AEW, also creating a name for himself, but also jumping ship back to WWE, it just shows his work ethic too, and his determination to really prove others wrong and to really push through, because this is, it's not a guaranteed thing. No. But look at him now. He gets a pop every time he comes out. And what I hate and I kind of like is when he first came back to WWE, he wasn't immediately a champion. They didn't throw him a title. Granted, he was a runner for it, but it was a good 2 years before he actually held it. So it was something that was really earned.
Sure. And I will say this, and this is no disrespect to AEW, but the fact that Cody coming back and winning the title at WWE, it brings more credibility overall. And he won back-to-back Royal Rumbles. So he's in the same conversation as Shawn Michaels or Stone Cold or, the Edge or any of these guys. Like, he's, for the foreseeable future, whether he's a champion or not, he's going to be probably for at least for the next 10 years, or unless he decides to walk away, he's going to be the top guy. We have a joke like between the both of us is when in doubt, Randy Orton, which is basically when in doubt, he's going to get a title shot or win the title. Cody Rhodes is basically in the same conversation now.
And I don't mean this negatively. I think of them as safe choices.
Yeah.
Because, and it's not because it's like, it's okay, it's mediocre. It's because either way you go, if you choose Randy or Cody, it's a great decision.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you can't really go wrong. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
All right, next guy. This is awesome too. Talking about someone that was an absolute joke. They actually brought this up from a storyline creative perspective, but he was supposed to be the guy. Not only did it happen, he ended up getting released, and then he came back and was the guy, Drew McIntyre. And I know you love him. Give us that brief history of his comeback.
Well, I know he started out many years ago, maybe 15-ish, 20-ish years ago. And he was one of the few that were from like the UK with Sheamus. And I know that he was pushed pretty hard, but it just didn't work out creatively. And I know he was finally released 2013, 2014-ish. And then came back a few years later. And now look at him. You put on some weight, put on some muscle, grow a beard. And I think he's fantastic. His skills and the evolution of his character has grown tremendously.
Yeah, sure. And again, he's going to be in that same conversation too, as he's always going to be kind of up there for at least for the foreseeable future. I think he'll either have a title or be in that conversation. All of his feuds are with top guys. I don't see that changing. I do remember, and the other thing too, like we mentioned Pops earlier, when he eliminated Brock Lesnar, that was a huge pop. And then of course he goes on to beat Brock Lesnar for the title. So I mean that just goes to show you that it was valid for them to give him that title.
Oh yeah. Who do we have next? Oh, it's your guy.
Yup. CM Punk. This was really a surprise when he came back to WWE. I remember. So funny enough, and this is something that you and I both can relate to. That was the same night as Florida State versus Florida. So that I got to be honest, most of my attention was during that game, but I always get to watch both. Two TVs right next to each other, and that's not going to change. And I remember, the event happens. It was actually good PLE. And then all of a sudden we hear Punk's music, and I just, everyone was just the mouth drop and the cheers. I mean, everyone was just absolutely in shock. And I just thought, again, going specifically just for Pops alone, we put CM Punk on the list because one, we legit, he even said so himself. He was never going to go back to WWE. Obviously, when McMahon left and now it's Triple H at the helm, I believe that had to at least initiate the discussion. But the fact that he came back and is now doing what he's doing, I love it.
Yeah. I've never been a Punk fan, and I will be very vocal about that. Yeah. However, he is so good at what he does. He is so good. I don't even know he's so good to be hated. I don't know. But I know like his final match was at Rumble in 2013, 14. And it was just a lot of frustration with him creatively, where he was like, I'm done. I'm not coming back. And he was gone for a good bit. So we really thought he was gone for good until he showed up at AEW in 2021. And then, they had their issues. That's pretty public now with backstage and probably more creative things too. And then, we all had that gut feeling. We're like, Vince is gone. Triple H is in charge. And is Punk going to be back? And what do you know? At Survivor Series?
Yep.
Walks on through.
Well, look, and what I will give everyone credit for, especially on WB staff and just in general, because it is impossible to keep a secret these days, especially on social media and the internet. I don't remember anyone saying, "Hey, we spotted CM Punk for that night." I don't remember that.
And a lot of the talent at WWE did not know that he was coming. Luckily, everyone was focused on Randy Orton coming back that night because everyone knew he was cleared and he was going to be there. So that was what everyone was anticipating. Some people assumed most likely he was going to jump ship that night, but I know from articles and interviews, a good 80 to 90% of the people that worked there had no idea that he was showing up. So some of those reactions were pretty legit.
Absolutely. All right, the next one. This is such a cool story because of legit. This was just, it sounded like his pure health. He put his body on the line so many times, time and time again. But when he returned at the Royal Rumble, talk about just an explosion. And let's go ahead and talk about Edge.
Mr. Opportunist took the opportunity to heal. And I wasn't really thinking he was going to come back just because of the injury that he had. We're like, he's done.
Yeah.
And he put in enough years for it to be a real reason. And, you know, when he came back, I think that was one of the biggest pops we've heard.
Ever.
No one was
especially at
that.
Royal Rumble. Yeah. And the other cool thing about it was I do remember I watched like a documentary on him, and I remember someone asked him, you know, if he has any aspirations of coming back. And I remember him specifically saying, he said, you know, if I never step into a ring again, I'll be a complete beast with it. You know, and he's won so many titles, so it's not like he had to come back. I just think whatever the reason that he had, I mean, you know, it's so cool. Thank you for coming back. But yeah, like, I mean, they said his neck was really, really, really bad. So he could have suffered some serious damage. And the fact that he just came back, and like, again, when he came back, I don't know what anyone expected, but to have him win the Rumble again and then main event Mania, now he's in AEW. You know, just hats off, because again, coming back from an injury like that is not easy. So
I know he had spinal stenosis, and he was out back in 2011, and 10 years later he shows up and says, I'm back at it. And granted, he's in his like late 40s. Not now, but at the time when he came back. So I'm like, your body is beaten and banged. And let's remind ourselves, he didn't have little easy matches. He was
TLC,
a ladder guy. He was a high flyer. Like, we've seen his matches. And you know, and even now with AEW, I'm still shocked that he's actually still competing, but he did say he'd give himself a couple of more years and then he would be officially done. But I don't believe these guys anymore because they retire so much.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, for sure. And I'm with you on that. I will say, I think physically, yeah, you do get to a point where you just can't do it anymore. So if I had to guess, he'll probably have to retire, not even because he wants to, he probably has to.
It'll be a sad day, but we appreciate his work.
For sure. All right, then the next guy, you could argue he's the greatest of all time. I know personally, like, you know, you and I don't necessarily have him on that list, but you got to give him credit where credit's due. Anytime he shows up anywhere, he makes a lot of money in wrestling. He actually viewed our story. I have to throw that out there. Hulk Hogan. You feel free to gloat about him looking at our story, because that was just so cool.
That was the first thing I wanted to say was thank you so much for viewing our story. I gasped and then immediately texted you. So yes.
Absolutely. And he's a devout Christian, just an awesome guy. But what's cool about this is I remember he beat Slaughter, and then I think he was in wrestling for about a year. I think 93, and then he beat Yokozuna, but then Yokozuna beat him again. He kind of was just out. Like, he was out of WWE for about 3 years, and then I remember it was, or 2 years, and then he was doing that show, and then Eric Bischoff approached him and said, "Hey, to kind of to get him to wrestle again. And what's interesting is I think he was basically retired at that point, or at least semi-retired. So whatever Eric Bischoff told him, and whatever whatever agreement that had, I mean, I know he had the full creative control and stuff, but the second he got to WCW, I mean, WCW was no longer number 2 anymore. And then from there, everyone else kind of followed along. And next thing you know, WCW is destroying WWE. And I really do think that had to do with Hulk Hogan.
I agree. I think them signing Hulk Hogan, taking him really out of retirement, because that's when I forgot what it was called, something Thunder, or like not Sequest, but it was on the beach. I remember. And that's when he was pursuing acting, because he did that a couple of movies too.
Mr. Nanny.
Huge. Yeah. I just remember the cover. He was in like a tutu or something. Yeah. But anyways, I just, when they signed him to WCW, I feel like it legitimized the company and said, hey, if we can bring this guy, because behind him came, Randy Savage. And then they started pulling other people like Nash and Hall, and we all know what happened there. And it just blew up. I think that is one of the greatest comebacks.
Absolutely. Yeah. They destroyed WWE, and he was at the top of, WCW until they closed. And what's crazy is when WWE purchased them, he came back, had that great match with The Rock. The crowd was so hot for Hogan. I don't know if I think you remember this. A month later, he beats Triple H for the world title. Granted, he only had it for a month, but that's impressive, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people kind of speculated, like, oh, okay, now that WWE has bought WCW, because it was so ugly that they would just kind of part ways, but that's not the case. And then, of course, that kind of, I think, patched a relationship, and he showed up to, he showed up on multiple WrestleManias and just different spots. And again, to this day, whenever he comes out, I mean, the crowd just goes nuts. So he will always be, he'll always be one of, the greatest of all time in a lot of people's minds, and he just draws money.
Yeah. And it's just, he was the face of wrestling since the 80s, and he is really an icon. And he may not be my icon of wrestling. He is for my brother Chris, but not for me. But he's still, I feel like you think of wrestling, you think of Hulk Hogan. It's like synonymous. Like it's, you can't help but think. And when you see him, that's all I think about, is like the great age of wrestling. And, how cool is he? Were you a Hulkamaniac? I don't know. But, he was at Rumble. He was in one of the boxes, and all he did was, and it was before really it started, the event started, and he walked out just for a second on like that balcony area just to like look at the ring, and everyone lost their mind, because they're like, oh my God, it's Hogan. I'm like, he's not even doing anything except breathing.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, he still has that impact on us.
1,000,000%. And whether you're a wrestling fan, or here's the other thing too, whether you're a wrestling fan, or more importantly, if you're not a wrestling fan, you know who Hulk Hogan is.
Right.
So, all right, next guys. This was one of the greatest pops in WrestleMania history. Talk about greatest surprises in WrestleMania history. When the Hardy Boys came back and were added to that match. And I have to think creative had to, and there's no other way, within an hour or two before the actual match, say, hey, whatever plans we had, we're scrapping it. Sorry to the other tag teams involved. The Hardy Boys are coming as the late entrant, and they're winning these titles, which I'm sure the other teams were very disappointed in, but hey, it worked, because that was insane.
I proactively Google that reaction and that entrance, because it just makes me so happy. I have a big smile. I love it. And it's so much fun, because it's the buildup, because it's the New Day is the one that's like, hey, by the way, we have another tag team. And then you hear the music and everyone's doing the and it's so cool. It's so heartwarming. And I don't care how old they are. I want to see them jump from a ladder, and they're going to do it. And they're amazing.
Yeah, I agree. And look, the cool thing is, if they were to come back again, the crowd will give that same reaction. We'll always know them as being the guys that do jump off ladders, and just just being who they are, high flying, no matter what. I mean, they both had great careers as singles and just
Mhm.
putting on great matches, no matter who they were up against.
Yep.
All right, next one, Triple H. This is, obviously he was out for he got injured. I remember them like replaying the injury and how he got injured. He comes back, wins a Rumble, goes right back to being the main event guy. Funny enough, I actually was at that Royal Rumble in Atlanta, and I this one's special to me. Like this one, I've never experienced an injury like what he experienced, but I do know what it's like to get hurt and have to rehab and come back and continue to grind and work out and prepare yourself. So this one is, I think a lot of athletes can relate to this. So it was so cool to see him come back.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Triple H. And I remember the injury, it was his quad, in 2001, 2002. And it was the tag match with Steve Austin.
Yeah.
Which once that happened, that kind of, disappeared. What was that? Who was that with? Benoit and Jericho? I think.
I believe so.
I think so. It was something like that. And I mean, that's no joke of an injury. That's pretty much like a career-ending one if it doesn't heal properly. So, and that was when he was at the top of his game, no pun intended. But and then he comes back, and I think that was one of the biggest pops on Raw was when he came back at Madison Square Garden, and he's wearing that jean jacket that everyone, I always think of that when I think of him. And then that reminds me of MJF when he came back this year wearing that. And I'm like, I know what you're doing. But yeah, and I mean, Triple H came back to reign, and I think he had a pretty good career so far.
Yeah, I would say so.
I think he did okay for himself.
Yeah, I would say so. And you know what's cool about that though is a lot of people kind of nag on him because he was Vince's son-in-law. But the truth is, and I watched a shoot interview with Eddie Guerrero, and Eddie Guerrero specifically said, "Look, I don't care who he's related to. Look at his work ethic. His work ethic speaks for itself." And all these years later now, as being the head of creative, look at his work ethic. He's working endlessly to make sure that we have the best product on television. Because the coolest thing about him being in the position that he's in is he has credibility. So the wrestlers actually they're not rolling their eyes when he's telling them something. They understand why he's saying what he's saying and how it can genuinely help them.
I agree. And I think that's why I like him so much, is not based on the heel and the character that he was, because he is a great character of mine, but not one of my favorites. But I think it's genuinely him as a person. And I know, and what's surprising was he was like the wrangler for the Clique, because the rest of them had a history, like a party background, and did drugs, drank, whatever. He is not a drinker. He is not a drug user. He's not a smoker. He never did any of that. And, he kept it clean. He had that strong work ethic and was really pushing to make the business better. And I think by him staying true to himself and sticking to his values, that really made him a very key leader in the locker room, which, and I don't care if he married Stephanie or not. I think he has such a great mind.
Sure.
And I think they picked the best person to handle everything in creative.
Absolutely. All right, next one. We're running out of time, but we'll get to these next two. Daniel Bryan, one of my personal favorites. I know you're not as high on him, but yeah, absolutely. He was forced to be sidelined for quite some time. Again, this is kind of similar to Edge. He had to fight his way to come back. He didn't have to, because at that point he accomplished what he needed to accomplish. But I think he just loved the game so much that he did came back. And he came back to WWE in 2018. Immediately gets thrown in the main event, and then AEW obviously in 2021. So I know he's not your favorite, but would you give him his praises?
Yes, of course. I'm very respectful of every wrestler that steps foot in a ring because
Yeah.
they sacrifice their time away from family and their schedule and their bodies for entertainment. So, yes, everyone will get their praises. I mean, that guy, multiple neck injuries and still keeps coming back. He's
Yeah.
hurt right now and he's going to be competing in London,
Yeah.
in a couple of weeks. Then I'm like, boy, have you learned your lesson? But you know what? He does great. So
No, for sure. And the other cool thing about that is I think he's saying that he's officially kind of walking away, and good for him. And I say this to anyone that's in any type of physical sport, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, obviously pro wrestling. Even like, being a contractor or construction, you want to get into a place where you're financially secure so you can just kind of walk away. So good for him.
mm-hmm.
All right. Last one. I have to bring my ACW guys out. One of the greatest explosions. And I remember reading that when I read the article in ECW history. When Sandman came back to ECW, I still remember that. You talked about YouTubing something. I YouTubed this because this was so special. And as ruckus as the crowd as ECW gets, just naturally, they took it to a new level. And I do think this could have been the greatest pops of all time. And I loved it. I loved it.
I think he is such an icon. I think he is. I mean, I compare him to Stone Cold, even though they're completely two different entities, but their vibe I get where I'm like, y'all are just the coolest people ever. No.
Well, the cool thing is too, I mean, a lot of the wrestling audience, I mean, they are blue collar people. Stone Cold, I think, kind of related to the blue collar audience. So a lot of people I don't know how many people know this or not. Obviously, wrestling fans do. He was an actual carpenter in real life. So like he was like as blue collar, he looks like a carpenter. Yeah. So he'd actually construct a lot of the sets and stuff for some of the props and stuff that they use. That's why he had, his kendo stick and would just whack people away. Like he actually made it. So, but yeah, that night was just so memorable. Anyone that has watched ECW, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
I've always wondered, still to this day, if he ever has a beer, does he crush it against his head still?
Maybe that's why he doesn't have one. Oh, man. All right. Yeah, we are running out of time. So but what a fun episode. Please chime in. Please DM us at the Chutes and Ladders. Please like, share, and subscribe. But once again, I am Jason.
I'm Desiree Josen.
All right, listen, please tune in to our next episode. And until then, have an awesome day.
Hey, friends.